The time has come for my people to go.
I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's what the people demand, and we gonna keep fighting till we get that land. I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's time to rise, to get what we want, we got to organize.
Welcome back, everyone. This is a continuation off of our last episode, which was centered around patriarchy. Once again, my name is Jeffrey. I'm repping the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Our objective is Pan-Africanism. We define Pan-Africanism as a totally liberated and unified Africa under scientific socialism. Today, as you can see, I have my comrades on the call, Winford, Derek, and Jesse. So today we're just going to continue our conversation that we had off of last week. And before we go ahead and dive into that, every episode we like to dedicate to one of our ancestors. This week, since we're talking about patriarchy, we would like to dedicate this episode to Fannie Lou Hamer. So just to kick it off here, I actually wanted to see if we could get into the police as an occupying force as it relates to gender and race, and how the militarization of the police affects, not only African, but also African women as well.
We can go many places with that, just to see how the military is out in the streets, and the police, which is, that's the local military essentially, but the police and how they relate to women and non-men, it's just like atrocious, especially as it relates to sex work, and just like their dehumanization and how they view them and what they can get away with, and how they're protected by the police union, of course. So it's just amazing to see how this stuff has been documented since the formation of police, and nothing's been done about it. It's really a silent conversation, but it's something to really fight against, and it just shows you why we don't need the cops. Like, the cops are not our friends. But to a larger conversation, just the importance of community defense, and why we need to engage in that as well to protect, obviously, ourselves against these forces, because they're out here, especially right now. It's getting to a point, I think we're going to see with the selection of President Joe Biden, that's going to even multiply. And when you have someone like Kamala Harris, who we could talk about, that goes into patriarchy too, because she represents and is leading the face of white supremacy and patriarchy, just because she's a woman. That doesn't absolve the fact that that can still be operated. So yeah, it's a huge conversation to have.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we see an increasing number of African women being incarcerated too. That doesn't get talked about enough. We a lot of times we censor mass incarceration around men, and I understand that because we are disproportionately incarcerated, but there's been an increasing number of African women being incarcerated as well, and I think that ties into the militarization of the police, and then looking at African women as less than in regards to other women or other groups of women too as well. So I think that's also a good point to bring up as well.
Yeah, I think one thing is you see a lot of rape of African women by the police. I know a couple of women personally that have gone through experiences like that by the hands of police officers, and white police officers in particular. But that happens with a lot of sex workers and just women, or Black women, African women in general across the country, where the police officer will pull them over, take them to somewhere secluded, and just violate them. So that's definitely something that it's a big issue that we have to contend with.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's a lot right there.
Asada.
Yeah.
We've been reading Asada the autobiography, and obviously, I think everyone's sure this is required reading because, I mean, she goes into her account, but I mean, obviously, with this work study, we've been seeing just the details of how her life, in particularly, was just laser focused, and they dehumanized her just for standing for justice. But you can just see through her struggle. I remember her reciting a story in which she dealing with cops in every scenario. It was always like beating her up, like just treating her like a less than human, and they still do that. And so, I mean, they're clearly an occupying force. I mean, cops are not, especially in conditions like you mentioned, Derek, like being victims of rape by cops. Like it just happens, and no one says anything about it. And again, they have the union to protect them from it, and the story gets missed. That's why we have to keep saying these names of the women that have been affected by police brutality. And it's not just in America, obviously. Any place where there are police officers, especially if there's not a community defense. I mean, if there's community defense, like you can look at in Cuba, for instance, they've done massive work in developing just so that people are not terrorized. Because that's what the cops are. Cops are terrorists. Yeah. They're here to protect the state and protect property. They're not, so.
Like when there's a force that's unquestionable, that has power over your life and death, that abuse is like, well, like regardless of like who it is, that abuse is bound to happen. I feel like, especially with like the way that Black people are mistreated and like dehumanized on the regular, and particularly Black women. There's so much violence done that's not even like put on the record. Even in spaces where we are recording things. I think sometimes like it can be normalized to the extent that like some forms of violence are seen as normal. So like if like somebody's joking about killing you or raping you, that can be something that we just think of as like, oh, haha, funny. But if they have the actual power to rape you and kill you without any like actual accountability being done, like how do you think people are going to react when it actually happens?
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then another thing is like, especially with police, I guess being held responsible for like anything wrong that happens in the country. There are a lot of situations that like police forces probably shouldn't have power in and shouldn't be the decision-making person. So like, for example, like abuse cases or like domestic issues. Like, there can be instances. I remember like reading a lot of cases where like, a lot of police forces didn't even look at rape kits and like all of them expired. So all the people who recounted their abuse to police, nothing even happened to the abusers, and like there is no accountability done. So I guess like making sure that like the people who have the responsibility and the like power to help the actual people are like part of the people and are like have our best interests in mind.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think we even see that in the medical field as well in regards to, I've seen articles talking about how African women's pain or the threshold for pain are usually thought to seem higher, right? That doctors, like European doctors essentially are look at African women as, oh yeah, they could deal with pain and stuff like that. But, it leads to the death of African women too as well. So I think that also ties in just how the system just devalues African women in general. So I guess with that being said too, I know it was talked about too a few seconds ago in regards to community defense. Maybe we could discuss revolutionary orgs or non-men orgs that have women wings or wings dedicated to women or non-men. essentially, or even just revolutionary women in themselves. Maybe we could bring those up and kind of elaborate on some of those as well. I think that would be good to do. Like for instance, I know the PAIGC had a women's wing. I think it's the UDEMU. So they were part of that, which was started, as some of you guys may know, by Milcar Cabal. Believe it was done in the 60s, if I'm not mistaken. And they saw the need to make sure women are liberated as well. So and I guess maybe we can even talk about the necessity of women organizations and possibly even like women's self-defense as well. So.
I just joined like the A-APRP, but I know that there's a women's wing as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. The like WRU.
Yep, yeah.
And like they're doing like a lot of good work. As of like in about the conversation about the importance of it. Yeah, I think especially now that there is like patriarchy in our systems, there needs to be spaces where women can like work together and build that isn't under the I guess that isn't under the domination of men, or like that isn't like part of that patriarchal process.
Absolutely, yeah. I would say, just to extend your point, if women are in the position, and it's not because I think a lot of us, we could get confused by the fact that women are in the party. It's like, oh well, that means they're participating, but if they're not actually making the decisions or conducting the thesis, then just their membership alone isn't worthy to say, oh, I've done my part, I've included women, if there's no power position involved in that. So but yeah, the AAWRU, incredible work. Just so many organizations women have been a part of and fight. They've been at the forefronts in all of the liberation movements. And it's just interesting to see how history, like if you even think of, and I don't want to derail too far from the point, but we recently watched Winnie, Nelson Mandela's wife, and no one talks about Winnie. Like, I have to admit, I just heard all about Nelson Mandela. I had no idea she was more militant than him. She was like, look, I'm not compromising with the cops. Whereas Mandela was kind of like, she was like, no. So like, but even that, and that's a historical record. We have so many other amazing women of that same accord. And so it's just interesting to see how history revises it, and the husband or the man is usually the one in the front, as opposed to the woman who was doing it harder.
Yeah, that's so true. Say, you see within the PAC, she was pretty much, helping lead the forefront of that movement. But, all the discourse is centered around, Nelson and what he did. But he obviously compromised and supported his life too. But, I think that was a great point to bring up in regards to that. And, and I think in every facet, and I remember even reading, how Europe underdeveloped Africa, where they're talking about the African women in the marketplace, where, they were the most exploited, and they took, means, or what Kwame Nkrumah calls positive action, which essentially is, not engaging in the system, pretty much boycotting the system, essentially, right? And they took a stand. So I think that's also important to note, because kind of what we were saying earlier is that, they're usually left out when we talk about revolutionary movements and orgs, which kind of ties back into patriarchy, because, when we talk about revolutionary actions, women just deal with the domestic stuff and we get on the front lines and hold the guns, right? Women are not, taught, or not taught, but I guess talked about in that light, to be on the front lines too with men as well. And they're seen as like, they're not capable of doing that. Although, other aspects are needed in a revolution. We talk about revolution, there's so many aspects to it, not just the armed aspect of it. You do need people in the medical care, but it shouldn't be relegated to just women. Men can also do those things too as well. So I think it's also important to note that in regards to organizational work and women. Yeah. So I think also too, when people talk about feminism, they kind of put it all in one basket. So I kind of want to maybe open up a discussion on how there's a difference in regards to race when it comes to feminism discourse in general, and how possibly there's some delineation between colonized women versus European women or women of European descent. Maybe you could elaborate on that. I know we kind of talked about this too in our work study, so maybe we could kind of open that up here in this discussion.
I think one thing, at least in the creation of these things, is like the difference in material reality for colonized women as opposed to as opposed to like other groups of women. Uh, at least for colonized women, like they're usually part of an exploited class. At least the masters were, uh, and so everything about them was dehumanized, and they had to experience all of the I guess all of the material and like physical abuses associated with that. So and I guess like an example of what I mean is like let's say like the 1950s. Black women were indirectly forced to like work as house helps or like work in like fields that weren't seen as like as valuable. And because it wasn't seen as valuable, they weren't allowed to join unions or like argue for like their rights. And so like they had no like there is so much less political or like organized political influence that they had that they didn't have to fight for tooth and nail to have.
All right.
Um,
Good point. Like the material conditions, I think that's the biggest difference, in between, as opposed to European women. Often, if their husband is working, they don't have to work. Whereas African women, colonized women in general, have to do most of the work, and it's usually service jobs. And we read an article about this recently in our work study, and we see just how often that's the labor is regulated to women, and it's the hard work. So it's not just like we think of these things as passing service jobs, but it's work that requires the most work, and they're underpaid. You get nothing for it, and so I mean that's a huge component when you just think of the labor and not being able to unionize. It's just a lot of factors that have been put in place in law to make it harder for them to, just because that's what patriarchy is. It's the dominance where men can have these positions and enact all kind of violences and suffer no consequences, because the ladder is then created, illusionary ladder, of course, that anyone can climb up here and be successful, and you can do it if you work hard enough, and you can be tactical, but not under capitalism. You can't.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of the times when we have this conversation, it's never, that separation is never made. So I thought it would be best that we talked about it, because like a lot of stuff, same things you both alluded to, is that colonized women are usually in predicaments where they're the underclass or peasantry class, or barely in the working class sometimes, and the men are even in the same situation, so they don't have the luxury in most cases to just sit at home or play those gender roles that patriarchy sets out. A lot of the times they're actually working too. So when these women organize, they're organizing, for a true cause to remove the system from exploiting them continuously, right? Now the system exploits, various women. Not saying that European women don't have a valid cause in this at all, because you do have some European women that are also in the underclass and peasantry class as well, and but and in comparison, this disproportionately colonized women were meant to be doing these service jobs, and who their husbands don't have the means to allow them to just be stay-at-home mothers and things of that nature. So I think that's also something very important that we keep in mind when we have these conversations too.
And I think at least one of the things I've heard that have been that has the potential to be hurtful in these conversations is the premise that some people have that like the system is like generally okay. We just need to make like some minor reforms to how it like treats women, uh, as opposed to making like fundamental changes that
Mm.
like change the actual that change those like preconceived notions of what a woman is supposed to do and be, and like as opposed to what a man is supposed to do and be, and how other people are supposed to do and be. So yeah, so just like we making sure that we still focus on like exploitation and like removing that entire thing completely, as opposed to like giving us a few scraps and expecting us to be proud of it.
Exactly.
Right. That's the point. I mean, capitalism is the enemy. We can get distracted and kind of going to I guess our first episode, the interview Jeffrey did with our comrade Jamila and Dr. Jared Ball, where he was like, sometimes those things could be distractions to a way. I mean, it's not really a distraction because all of those things are necessary points. But I guess what I'm saying is we should remember that the system of capitalism is the enemy here. And we can be misled through whichever, where we're all being brutalized by the same enemy. And patriarchy came from capitalism. The exploitation of colonized women and the added stress and all of that is just subsets of that. But even if that didn't exist, we would still have to confront it because obviously they're invisible. And these forces, you can think of it as just always being there. Always got to be alert. And whenever we find that manifestation, we go through the work to correcting it because it's going to always be there because it's just 24/7. But yet we have the resources. We have books like Asada Shakur, and there's another book I'm just seeing it in my mind's eye that we read that was really good, that spoke on the patriarchy, especially as it pertained to women's labor. I just can't remember it out.
Yeah, and I'm about to say that book, but I think it goes into one of the last things we're going to talk about is book suggestions in regards to patriarchy. And I think the book you're referring to is Night Vision. I think Illuminating War.
Yeah, that's it. Illuminating War. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. Even me myself, that's one of the books that we read as part of the anti-patriarchy work study that like, wow, this book like opened my eyes and expanded my horizons on the system. So yeah, that's one. We've been reading Asada. That's also an amazing book as well. I believe everyone should read that. Talks about her whole experience dealing with various facets of life and dealing with patriarchy in so many ways. And it's a very physical way too, as you can see in that book. She dealt with
Right.
Mostly, men as well. So I don't know, any of you other guys have some book suggestions in regards to patriarchy or sexism? Or maybe even articles that you guys have read that you would suggest some of us to read.
Yeah, so if you want to learn a bit more about, I guess, the history of gender in Africa, there's this book called like African Sexuality by Sylvia Tamale.
Oh, yeah, I heard of that book.
Yeah, add to my list too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I want to add that to my list and get that on there. Get that political education going on. I mean, I think with that, it's a necessity that we continuously engage in because, patriarchy is a force, capitalism is a force, so we have to, further analysis on all these things. We have to. What's the first rule? The first rule in the handbook of revolutionary warfare is know the enemy, and I think it's imperative that we know the enemy in their systems too, so we know how to combat and move accordingly. that counts for every part of the system, not just racism and capitalism as it counted every fact.
I just wanted to read a section of the book about neocolonialism illuminating. This is just where it talks about, and this just shows you, I have this highlighted. I'm not sure exactly the context, but it's still good. It says, the labor of women and children was therefore the first thing sought for by capitalists who used machinery. That mighty substitute for labor and laborers was forthwith changed into means for increasing the number of wage laborers by enrolling under the direct sway of capital every member of the workman's family without distinction of age or sex. And I mean, it just goes to show you, like, capitalism, they knew they can get women and children to work.
Yeah,
the system would thrive, and that's what they do. So I mean, just looking at how they employ even women in high. I mean, I mentioned earlier Kamala Harris, but she's a perfect example. Or any, someone in power who might represent some sort of emblematic, like, oh, I want to be that, but yet it's still upholding capitalism.
Yeah.
And so we got to obviously fight against that and realize that the collective, that's the work that obviously we're doing in this work study. It's just realizing all of our ideas. We may not understand everything at a time. We're constantly growing, but we're doing it together, as opposed to just individualizing our experiences and saying, okay, I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna make this amount of money, because you're not gonna make 80 grand, like the likelihood of you making 80 grand, and especially the way the world is going right now, and just the ways capitalism has us indebted through, you're paying off school loans, all of the things that it's not going to work unless we organize together. And obviously in doing that, that means looking at how we participate in regurgitation of toxic information and behaviors that come through patriarchy. So I think reading books and just constantly interrogating ourselves is a good way to start, because I know before I was doing this, it's not that I was reading, but I didn't individualize my experience, not realizing that this world is so much broader. And like we mentioned in the handbook of revolutionary warfare, know your enemy.
Yeah.
So then you won't think your brothers, who look at you, they're not your enemy. Like that they want you to think that, you focus on that, but you realize the enemy is this system that's enabling these inconclusive statements, because that's what it is too. I mean, a lot of the patriarchy doesn't make sense. You just grow up thinking these things, but then it's like, wait, why am I going out here thinking, why can't I cry about this? Why can't I go out and feel whatever? Like, what's stopping you? Oh, my brain has been polluted through the streams of whatever medium of propaganda. So like it's just about connecting in that way to the collective and not relying on that individual, because the media, the petit bourgeois, that's what they're there for. They want you to essentially buy into that dream, and obviously it's just not helping. They want us to also stratify our experiences, not connecting it to Africa, realizing that, if we think, oh, it's just me, you're not looking at, your brother in another country who's dealing with even worse conditions. But yeah.
And I think you made a great point. But before I even get to that, I think another book is Women in Society by Secretary Red.
Yeah.
That book is really, really great. And I'm gonna take a copy out of Jesse's playbook and say a quote from there too. Progress comes about, therefore, through the struggle that men and women must wage together. And that kind of goes into, even with organizations and doing organizational work, is that you're not relegating everything. You create a women's wing, you just don't relegate all the work to them. We're in this war together, so we fight with them and we engage in struggles with them too as well. So I think that's a process that also has to be continuous as well, and not just putting all the weight and burden on the woman as well. But one point that you definitely made that I actually want to dive into is how, you talked about the mass media and propaganda. So maybe we can talk about how the media perpetuates women, or perpetuates patriarchy, essentially, through various channels.
Ooh. Somebody take it before I go. Because I don't know. I could go in many ways. We're just like, it's just a daily thing. And it's something that, is hidden. It's not, we earlier today, we were part of a conversation, some of us on this call, about just seeing the ways like patriarchy is like the coronavirus, like it's invisible. Like it's not one of those things you see bluntly all the time, but it's manifested in just the dominance of male space and not allowing, like you mentioned earlier, like it's one thing to regulate or saying, oh, it's the woman's, they let them deal with that because they know what they're dealing with because they have the stories, they have the account. But we are men, the ones who are in it, we can say, okay, how am I contributing to this? Just that self-interrogation. And it starts with just realizing how you're getting your information. And also, doing the inner work, childhood trauma, all that stuff. It's not pretty, clearly, because, you might look at some stuff that you didn't want to see, but it'll get you in a better position to understand the collective if you realize that, okay, you don't even blame yourself for it. You realize, oh, my brain was just like the system has done to everybody. It stole your brain, just hijacked it, gave you the wrong information, made you reactive. So a lot of people do is they're reacting as opposed to actually having an analysis. And that's why I think, again, this work study process is great because it's a process. This is not like, okay, I got it, let's go. Like, I don't want to, it's like, no, we need to have the theory before we get the gun, so that we could be less reactive and less like, oh, well, that's not the way. Well, I need to see it. Because I think men also, we have a tendency, obviously this is a generalization, but it still stands true of just wanting to get to the point. Like, okay, what is it? Like, what are you saying? Where are you trying to, not understanding the thing that came before it. So like, just having that historical analysis, the land analysis, gender analysis, all these analysis, you just need to have an analysis essentially, and not be so quick to accept, these, and listening to people. If someone is saying, hey, I feel like, you can't, misgendering, not understanding that people are living a different, not prescribing to the same sentiments that you may have been taught.
And I even think of like a lot of the childhood movies that we watch, like Cinderella, like Hercules and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. Oh, Disney especially.
those concepts, right? And then growing up, women are looking to be the damsel in distress. They're looking for their Robin, or they're looking for these things, but subconsciously, like you said, your brain's been hijacked by the capitalist system that perpetuates patriarchy essentially. So I think, that's in one way. And then it kind of robs you of your mind at an early age. You just grow up thinking these things because, the system is constantly pumping this into you, infomercials, movies, even how we engage on social media a lot of the times too. There's a lot of content that's out there, it's perpetuating a lot of these things. So yeah.
And like, at least like I have this might be a bit of tangent, but I have like a note about like personalizing like systematic issues like this. I think like sometimes it can be easy for at least the solution to be to just like sulk about it and like only like change only try to change like your minds only try to change your mindset about it. And like while like making sure that you like develop that understanding is like vital and foundational to everything, to kind of everything that you like choose to do. Like making sure that like we still work on changing the material reality of people in the world. So like making sure that like, okay, I'm understanding like what they're saying. What can I do to help them? Or what can I do to make their lived experience better?
Yeah.
It's still important to work on. So it's kind of like a two-step process. Like develop that analysis, apply that analysis.
All right. Like, okay, you got it, but now you need to put it on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Asada said it the best. It's like, what, theory without practice is empty.
Right.
So, you claim to be a revolutionary or one that seeks a better society that we're living in, and you're, engaging in political education and theory, you also have to put these things in practice. So it's not just talking about it; it's actually being about it and seeing it all the way through, essentially. So yeah. So you got anything to add, Derek?
No, I don't know if, well, as far as the media, I mean, y'all just basically covered it all. I mean, from the movies, the television shows, the commercials, especially commercials, they conditioned us to these certain ideals of how a man should be and how, what, the roles for the men and the women. So, I mean, from birth, almost birth and early childhood all the way to adult, a lot of people, even till today, my age and older, still being propagandized and conditioned by the media.
Yeah. And what I'll do too is for those who missed on the book recommendations that we made, I'll definitely drop that in the description for those who missed that. So with that being said, this concludes this episode, and we look forward to having you guys. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and stay in tune for further episodes. And with that being said, for whatever.